Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity's recent release, and the rapidly approaching release of Persona 5 Scramble's localization bring to mind Fire Emblem's Musou effort a few years back. Despite solid sales, I feel like I'm in the minority online that actually likes it, and I get it. The game's got issues. I still thoroughly enjoyed the overall experience, but there's clear room for improvement. So today, I want to discuss a few things I'd like to see in a Fire Emblem Warriors sequel, if it ever happens. This definitely isn't definitive, just floating a few ideas out. So, let's start with the roster. Yeah, this is where the first game fumbled. Pulling mostly from 3 games of 16 just wasn't the play, and even then, things were a little off. It took DLC for us to get Azura, a central character to Fates. Even Lucina almost didn't make the cut. Lucina, probably the most popular and iconic character from one of the 3 games they narrowed down to. But we did get Celica and Lyn. Without Alm, Hector, or Eliwood?
Hey yo, what the fuck?
Yeah, it was kind of a mess. So, how do we remedy this? Well, since Musou games tend not to cut characters, we can carry over the first game's cast, and won't need to add any more characters from the titles it focused on. To be fair, let's assume the number of roster additions will be the same size as the original game's initial roster. That gives us 23 characters, which will round up to 25. I'd start by just adding all the remaining lords, the main protagonists for laymen. I think whole series representation is a must, so I'd advise resisting the temptation to load up on 3 Houses characters, which is basically repeating the first game's mistake of alienating characters and fans of other games. That's 17 new characters. After that, add in the pseudo-lords, those characters that are kind of main protagonists, but not quite, like Galencia or Yuri. If there's any space after that, just plug in some fan favorites like Soren, Hilda, or Nino. Maybe even throw in some villains like Leon, Arvis, or the Black Knight. Just like the first game, we can add more characters as DLC. Ideally, more fan favorites, and maybe the odd wildcard we didn't know we wanted. If La Rochelle gets in, I'll buy it twice. That doesn't make for a dead even split, but considering the first game's lopsidedness, that's kind of impossible without either massive bloat or cutting people's favorites, neither of which we want. Overall, I think the roster should balance giving love to the whole series with delighting the fans. Let's discuss the combat next. Much as I enjoyed the OG Warriors gameplay, the lack of weapon variety and the over-reliance on clones definitely hurt. The first thing I'd like to see is more weapon types. Daggers and gauntlets are a start, and maybe more differentiation between magic types. Whether it's the Anima, Light, Dark triangle from the GBA and Tellius games, or adapting the Faith and Reason dynamic from 3 Houses. This would introduce more interplay between units, a staple in traditional Fire Emblem. Just look at the classic Sword, Lance, Axe triangle. I'd also like to see more unique weapon class combinations. The original Warriors stuck fairly hard and fast to the class system of classic FE, but I think it's worth scrapping that for the sake of diversity, and if needed, readapt the character to make them more interesting to play. I know I want to play as a Dread Fighter, or a bow-wielding Wyvern Lord. On the topic, it'd be great to give appropriate characters multiple movesets, just like how the original Hyrule Warriors does, or to be more Fire Emblem related, like ults in Heroes, though no one needs 7. It would be nice to see all the lords running around with their signature blades, but that raises the age-old issue.
I see. Too many swordsmen, are there?
You're damn right, Sophis, but we can mitigate that. Take Lyn, for example. She's classically a swordswoman, but thanks to Heroes, I associate her with her secondary weapon type, bows, almost as much as swords, so why not make use of that? And luckily, most lords get some unique options when promoting in their base games. I don't think anyone would begrudge giving Erica the option of her horse, or letting Ike use Irvin if it makes them more unique. Speaking of unique, let's talk about clones. In some cases, it honestly makes sense. Chrom and Lucina playing the same? Sure, I get it. But there's no reason 3 Peg Knights from different places, or 4 bow users, should have the exact same combo. Other elements like stats, skills, personal weapons and the like do differentiate them, but for a layman player, they're going to feel homogenized. At the very least, if two characters share a class, give them either some slight quirks in their combos or a mechanic specific to them. I can handle Edelgard and Hector playing similarly, but make Edelgard's crest part of her playstyle, something like that. Tiki introduced the cool but underutilized concept of transforming characters, and I think we could afford one or two more, from the Lagoos to Faye or Mur from the GBA games, or maybe even Hyrule from Three Houses. The point is that Fire Emblem showcases many different ways to fight, regardless of how it may come across in Smash, and I'd like to see that emphasized. On to the story. You may have noticed I included Alphonse and Sharena from Heroes on the roster. That's because I think the world of Heroes is a perfect backdrop for Fire Emblem crossover spin-offs, and frankly, I don't think many people are itching to see these guys or this place again. Not only are Alphonse and Sharena fairly popular in the fanbase by now, but Asuka provides an easy way to bring together characters from across the series without having to establish some new contrivance. The story possibilities are honestly endless, whether it's another War of Heroes with Veronica, or whatever the hell Book 3 was. It could even loop into Heroes' story, similar to Age of Calamity being a prequel to Breath of the Wild. That said, I'm not saying the story needs to be part of Heroes' canon, just make use of its skeleton, so to speak. It could easily be its own standalone tale, set in the world of Heroes without having anything to do with Heroes' ongoing story. Honestly, anything works. While Warriors' story was nothing special, one thing I'll give it over Heroes' story is that the original Fire Emblem cast are far more relevant. I'd like to see more of that. If things really go well, this could be the opportunity to make Asuka the location for Fire Emblem crossovers, with Alphonse and Sharena as their faces. Heroes has really taken off since the original Warriors released, with a dedicated fanbase, so there's plenty of mainstream appeal too. All in all, I'd like the story to at least feel worth caring about. Honestly, I'm just mentioning visuals because I remember Twitter going nuts over a JPEG of rocks the first game used as a floor texture. That said, I think Warriors actually looks pretty good most of the time, especially for a relatively early Switch title. I dare say it looks better than what came 2 years later. In particular, some characters got fantastic depictions. Azura looks like she has literal water flowing down her head, and it's amazing. And I'm a firm believer that Lynn's bike shorts should be a permanent part of her design. But yeah, just tighten up on things like textures and the like, and please, I beg of you Koei Tecmo, or whoever makes the game, if there are CG cutscenes, hire another studio than the one that did them in Three Houses and Echoes. I am tired of these 16 FPS movies. Seriously, just bring back Anime Incorporated. 9 years later, and I still think Awakening has the best cutscenes in the series, and that's just not right. What I most want to see is the game just really lean into what Fire Emblem is from every perspective. Gameplay-wise, the original game did a good job integrating Fire Emblem mechanics into the Warriors formula, but this time I'd like to see it done the other way around. Make it more like a Fire Emblem title with Warriors-style combat, similar to how Persona 5 Strikers is basically just Persona 5 but with the turn-based combat replaced with hack and slash. Maybe even take a page from Valkyria Chronicles book and alternate turn-based strategy with real-time combat. Looping in with a more diverse roster that we mentioned before, be more adventurous with cast interaction. I quite enjoyed the supports in the original game, and a more diverse roster would provide plenty of room for some supports we wouldn't necessarily expect. Ninian teaching Tiki dancing, Claude teaching Elise pranks, Alm and Crom discussing the finer points of Citrus. History mode from the original game was a fun nostalgia trip, but personally, it got a little monotonous after a while, though to be fair, that might just be a consequence of Muso gameplay. Still, I think either a refined version of it, or something similar, would be a great way to pay homage to the stories of the older games without straight up rehashing them in the main story. From an AV perspective, more could be done to mesh it with the series style. The remixes in the original are pretty damn good, but more small details like using Fire Emblem sound effects on menus, familiar jingles and the like would go a long way. The Warriors crossovers tend to be love letters to the source material, so go all in on that. For all its faults, I think the original Fire Emblem Warriors was a solid foundation for a great Fire Emblem Muso. Between history mode, including details like the weapon triangle, the support system, and more, it had a lot of the right ideas. It was mostly some very odd decisions in its direction, an unambitious story mode, and a lack of polish in places that held it back. That's why the running theme here is that a potential sequel should expand on what came before. There's been no word of a sequel since Fire Emblem Warriors' release, so who knows, it was probably a one and done, but I think it would be a shame to let the potential there go to waste. But that's just me. Would you be interested in a Fire Emblem Warriors 2? What would you like to see in it? Let me know down below. And with all that said, thanks very much for watching, and I will see you later.